Hello, hello. I'll give everyone a moment to connect to sound. Hello and welcome to the Brooklyn Rail's 1310th New Social Environment. I'm Joshua, a programs associate here at the Rail, and I have the pleasure and privilege of being your MC today for a conversation featuring Lumi Tan, Anh Vo, Maura Donohue, and Christina Yang. And now I'll introduce today's guests and host. Lumi Tan is an independent curator and writer based in New York City, specializing in interdisciplinary exhibitions and performances. Current and upcoming projects include those at Doosan Gallery in Seoul, Performance Space New York, and the 2026 Converge 45 citywide exhibition in Portland, Oregon. Based in Brooklyn and Hanoi, Anh Vo is a Vietnamese choreographer and writer working in the expanded field of performance. Their practice mobilizes the naked body and its variations to make explicit the entanglement of power and apparitional forces that cut across flesh. Maura Donohue is chair of dance and director of MFA at Hunter College and has been making work and facilitating, curating, producing, and leading public conversations in the US, Asia, and Europe for over 30 years. And our host today, Christina Yang, is executive director of AAMC Foundation, as well as an independent curator based in New York and Williamstown. She specializes in spectatorship, politics of the image, experimental genres, and feminist care. We are lucky to have her as a contributor to the Brooklyn Rail. And with that, I'll go ahead and pass the virtual mic over to you, Christina.
Thanks so much, Joshua. Do you want to also maybe go to our holding slide? Great. So welcome, everybody. Thank you so much to the Brooklyn Rail, to Chloe, to Fong, to Magali, and to Joshua for the invitation to be in conversation with three amazing curator, artists, choreographers, and now, writers, translators, researchers. We are going to be talking about a really incredible research, programming, performance initiative that they have started. That is sort of like just, how should we say, arriving to New York City, but in fact that they have been working on for several years. So just also, though, want to recognize that this effort, this arrival into New York City is a world-making effort that's happening on many levels, on the levels of geopolitics, the histories of dance and performance, and creating a template or a toolbox, kind of like really building a landscape for us. So we want to recognize that effort that's happening on behalf of the curator artists. So in as much as this project is unfolding over multiple stages in multiple media, multiple times, I think we're going to really focus on the four performance artists that are going to be presented here in New York City, and we'll have each of the curator and artists speak to some of those selected kind of bodies of work. So why don't we go to the next slide, if we could, Joshua? So yeah, I'd like to invite the three artist curators to actually tell us about, how did you meet? How did you come together? What was the genesis for thinking about this amazing project, which I'm going to have you speak about the title in a little bit, but I want to hear really about the three of you and sort of what you're bringing to this, brought to this, kind of this initiative. This is a view of the three of them in conversation at a program that took place earlier this fall. So just as a way to, stage the collective here. But I know maybe Maura, do you want to start, since I understand, you have like a historic performance relationship, in Vietnam, as does Anh, obviously. But yeah, I mean,
Sure.
maybe, yeah.
Yeah, sure. I can join. I'm also just loving how that slide looks like I'm like laying something down very seriously. I'm just hand gesture in the slide. So I mean, we all met in sort of different ways, and I'll just give the sort of quick story that I've been stalking on for years. Just so excited that there was somebody else working in this realm of experimental performance who was Vietnamese in New York, and so I finally. One day we were at the chocolate factory together, and I actually left and said to my friend, there's somebody in there I really, really, really need to talk to. So I actually went back in and was like, hi, we don't know each other, but I'm obsessed and I have to introduce myself. And in that conversation, we got to, oh, and then next year's the 50th anniversary of the end of the war. We should do something. And that grew from there. And it was actually through this project that I got to meet Lumi. So this is its own really incredible convergence for us, I think, in terms of finding community. Um, I don't know, Ang or Lumi, do you have anything else about how we actually met before I do my Mekong project history?
I mean, yeah, I think that was a good sort of story to start with. That's to say, like, we never really worked together in this way. We just jumped into this humongous project fully based off vibes.
Yeah.
And we like spent 2 weeks in Vietnam all together in January 2025 doing research on like our own weird funding constellation. Like nobody funded us
Yeah.
as like a group to do this. And yeah, we improvised. I think all three of us are really good improvisers, and that's why we just work so well together.
Yeah, I mean, I think the only thing I'll add, and Mara will go into her history with the Mekong project soon, but like, just in terms of like how this group was like, or what we each bring to this collaboration, I think is so important in terms of like, Mara having this long history, but like not having worked in Vietnam for a few decades, but then Eng starting to go back and forth, performing in Vietnam and New York. And then for me, I had never even, I'm a Vietnamese American, but I had never even been to Vietnam ahead of our research trip. So for me, like very much being like like not only being the only like curator and not an artist, but like being very much an outsider and like taking on this kind of like outsider position. And then I just wanted to add, just because she's on screen, the fourth person on stage with us at HR Archive in America is very, very close collaborator of ours, Do Tuong Lin, who has helped us tremendously, is an incredible researcher, art historian of Vietnamese art, and has drawn many, many connections for us and provided a lot of historical context for us as well.
All the gossips.
And all the gossips.
Yes,
Very
all the
important.
gossips of Vietnamese contemporary art.
Yes.
You have to have someone who has that lane, right?
Yes.
Yeah, you definitely need to know the sort of the silent workings, so the silent relational workings going on when you're coming into these spaces.
Great, thank you for that. Maura, did you want to go back maybe to one of your earlier projects? I actually have a second question, but I think, let's talk a little bit about your specific relationship to, where we are now.
Yeah.
And work you've done, in the past, yeah.
Definitely. What's so exciting about this project and about being able to connect with Ang and Lumi is the way that this is a kind of echo return or cycle for me, because 20 years ago, I was co-organizing and facilitating something called the Mekong Project, which was coming out of Dance Theater Workshop, which is now New York Live Arts. And so that project was Rockefeller Foundation funded and had a focus on the Mekong River Delta region. So it was a variety of Southeast Asian countries, and even the Yunnan province of China were included in that. We were doing residencies and some exchanges. But in that project, I was also able to find a US State Department grant that was Vietnam US specific. And so we grew the Mekong project to also include a particular exchange that brought 12 Vietnamese artists over to the US for a 3-week residency, or for a 3-week visit and residency. They weren't making work. They were meeting other artists and meeting other institutions, but just beginning some conversations. And that was also like January of 20 years ago. And so I'm just thinking, like, why do we do this to Vietnamese people? We keep bringing them in the middle of these snowstorms. I was like, it's like this kind of hazing almost to like give the New York.
Yeah.
But yeah, so there was this moment of incredible like exchange, explosion, and this was also coming out of the late 90s. And so that community of artists was experiencing this incredible burst of growth and these sort of belief in possibilities. And one of the things that's come for us in this project was, and then for me, I didn't go back for 20 years. I had a second kid and then had to go back to grad school and get a full-time job and health insurance and those things. And then suddenly it was 20 years before I was going back. So I was going back also just personally, going back with my mom, who hadn't been back for 16 years. And this was all timing around that. And I think one of the most significant takeaways for me was I had made a real assumption about I had made an assumption that was related to some belief that there was just a kind of linear growth, that with economic growth, there would also be artistic, like an increase in artistic output. But what I learned was that the state had gotten even better at surveilling artists, and that actually the mechanisms of censorship were very strong and active in ways that I hadn't thought would have happened. And so actually the conditions under which artists are now making work have gotten much harder 20 years later, despite economic growth in the country. So that's been something I've just been carrying forward with me through this project.
Thank you so much, Maura, for giving us a little more background about how you approach this performance project. Joshua, actually, can we go to slide number 4? I want to look at the this, or actually 5. Sorry. So I'm interested still in your research and the people you've met and the return to Vietnam. But I think we're going to go also then back to some early history, or not early, whatever, like as Ang described, the sort of OG moment of experimental performance in Vietnam. But you mentioned, Maura, that your first conversation with Ang was about the 50th anniversary of the end of the Vietnam War. And so I actually would like to ask the three of you, what is your relationship to 1975? I mean, I'm assuming that you were all born afterwards, and sort of like how this carrying of like an intergenerational and then subsequent, what do you want to call it, like the post-war period, how it impacted you and how you saw that kind of in this like, tracing of that performance history. Because I mean, this is a date and a monumental global event between the world and Vietnam that is fairly significant, but I would love to hear sort of your, why you marked it a date that like was that you weren't even, I'm assuming you weren't even alive yet when the end of it, but how you were still living with it, I guess. And I also, I mean, this idea of like absence and the ghosts and sort of like what's not spoken is still it feels very something that we should kind of like put some language onto.
I'm just going to let everybody know I was 5 years old in 1975.
Okay, that's good. I wasn't sure. You look younger. You look younger.
But I'll let Lumi talk a little bit about how that was actually like the echoes were important when we started the project, and then it's really become focused on other things.
I mean, I think for me, I would say like part of my outsider perspective is, I'm first one in my family to be born in the United States. Both my parents are from Vietnam. I was born in 1981. And so I think I've always just in this position of my family, like had a very, not totally distant, but more distant relationship to the war, living in Vietnam, etc. So I think, when Ang first approached me, we talked a lot about, the diaspora and the effect of the anniversary on the diaspora and like what it would really mean for us to bring together kind of an interdisciplinary group of artists from the diaspora to engage with artists from Vietnam and, understanding that there hasn't really been much of that, I would say like matchmaking or something like that. And, I think the further we got into this conversation, not only did we see that there was so much of this kind of like very like sanctioned activity around the 50th anniversary and like the ways that it was marked by, academics and universities and, cultural institutions that do not have any interest in experimental art. And so we're like, I think that really, that and of course just doing our own research in Vietnam really helped us hone in on this idea that like in the end, we weren't interested in that diaspora conversation. We really did want to focus on the artists who were living and working in Vietnam.
Yeah, I guess my personal relationship to that 1975 moment is like I was born pretty much like the first generation of peace. Like after 75, there was also a war with China in 79, and then like just like 10 years of extreme poverty. So it was really intense in Vietnam. Like even with my older brothers, they very much still in that war era. I think my generation is the first post-war for real in Vietnam. And there's this like I think there's this impression in Vietnam that the world is too obsessed with war when they mention Vietnam.
Mm.
I inherited that and I feel like with this project initially I had this agenda that's like no like actually y'all like we very much still in this post-war moments. I think like my generation is super lost and very traumatized on like a total like I keep talking about war as weather like it's not like an event that happened. It's like this pressurized humidified environment for me. So initially, I wanted to do this kind of imposition of that frame of war on this Vietnam thing to push the people from inside the border actually to reflect on what that history means. Yeah, but it becomes its own other thing now.
Yeah, it really changed. I mean, when we first started, the project was tentatively called Everywhere is War, which had been a title of a project I had been part of with Asian Arts Initiative in Philly 20 plus years ago. And it was also coming in a moment where there were like really specific anniversary events and echoes in relation to the fight for Palestinian liberation, college campus encampments, protest, and the way that governments were responding to student protest that was so strong in that experience, and also like actual anniversary dates when Columbia University gets stormed is exactly on an anniversary of Vietnam War protests. And so it felt very present for us that there were these incredible historic echoes occurring around us. And so that was an original, like almost like our original research question about like how we were repeating in some ways on this side. But then we got to Vietnam and we started meeting artists and talking to folks, and the project really shifted to a Vietnamese perspective and to not a Vietnamese diasporic perspective, which was where we were kind of approaching at first in this kind of a Vietnamese American history space. And then we were getting really caught up with what were the concerns for Vietnamese artists. So that helped us shift, which then got us to we exist in the ambivalence of those motherfuckers as like a real understanding of what everybody's kind of operating inside of, which is this incredible structure of ambivalence and these almost like these structures over us and around us.
Thank you so much. Yeah. Go ahead, Maura.
Yeah.
Did you have something else you want?
I just realized, but I would just share a little and so yeah, I was 5 in 1975, and so I'm here because of that war, though. So that war has always been a really a part of our family legacy. My father was an American naval officer, so that's. My family's from Central Vietnam, so I had a family, my mom fled and she married an American and went to the US with me, and a younger, older brother was, fought for the South Vietnamese Navy. Older brother went for the Viet Cong. Older sisters husband was in the North Vietnamese army, so it was like absolute civil war split of that kind of central region. So that legacy has been really present for us in my family. And in 1975, I had four distant cousins coming to live with us in suburban New England. And so there's been a particular way that that was often an organizing idea. And then over time, I think similarly, I got to the like, I'm so tired of that being how we think about this incredible country. And in particular, being able to work with artists has helped really move it into, I think, what is other conversations that aren't as centered around like an American memory space.
Thank you so much, Maura, for sharing that and for introducing. Let's see. So, Josh, can we go back to slide number 2 then? How you came about conceiving of this now program focusing on Vietnamese artists. So, I want to turn to thinking about the artists themselves, but also just one more prehistory moment in looking at where this, again, I like beginning, so really kind of some of these like early questions were percolating, but also would love to get all three of your thoughts on the title, the current title of the program, and this idea of holding at least two different histories or two different kinds of experience. The idea of ambivalence, holding two kind of like two or three or multiple opposing sentiments about the relationship between Vietnam and the U.S. or just working as an artist in Vietnam. But speaking about, so this is the sort of hero image for the performance space New York performances that are starting on Thursday. And if you wanted to speak to this, but also I think the next slide is also really compelling, with this group of artists that that the performance, so to speak, kind of involved. So I don't know who wants to speak to this first, but yeah, so the project title and then maybe some of this early beginning point of Vietnamese performance art, but in the U.S.
You chose the photo.
Yes, I could
Yeah.
speak to this photo, to this image, this work. I mean, this is very much like an OG generation Vũ Dân Tân, and he's not a performance person. Like he makes objects. He just like almost like a craftsman, and I like this work for our project because he like made this in America when he was in residence on the West Coast. So there's that like U.S. Vietnam exchange thing in like 1999, I think, and then it became a performance just because of necessity of the situation. Like he wanted to bring this car back to Vietnam, but then he like the tax on cars in Vietnam is like 200%, and no one can pay that. And he cannot argue with them that this is an artwork. So what he had to do was to take out the engine at the port. Like it was a 2-3 day event. So only after he took out the engine that the car could come in without paying tariffs. And so he always had this fantasy of driving the car around, but because without engine it doesn't drive. So then I think they hired a truck to tow the car all around Hanoi. So it just like became a performance. And I think that to me really like it's like this emblem of Hanoi performance art where these people they don't like go to make performance because they are performers. Like it speaks to a certain kind of socio-historical political necessity. Like it's just they do it because they have to. And that this for me really embodies that spirit. Like none of these people that and maybe not none, but like most of the people that we bring over are not like performers who are trained in conservatory in this way. Like they just perform because they feel like they have to.
Great. Maybe we should go to Hanoi, so to speak, with the next. Unless, yeah, Lumi and Maura, do you have anything else you want to say about like the title of the program and before we jump into looking at more artworks?
Well, I guess we would say that the title So we've got the image, right? The sort of image, and what's been really beautiful for me too was learning more about this project, because by being in this, I found out about this project, and we, one of our public talks, we screened a film about this project, and knowing that that was happening on the West Coast right at the end of the 90s, and so that was right in this moment of exchange, and just preceding the beginning of the Mekong project, which is coming out of New York, and just realizing that, that there was this kind of vibrancy of activity, and also just loving that it came out of Oakland. And then the title, the We Exist in the Ambivalence of Those Motherfuckers, is our lyrics from another artist who is part of, I don't know how much I should say about this, but Nop Dies, we're going to screen some of a film about this particular artist on Thursday as part of our 29th, January 29th event, Thursday night. But so that came out of song lyrics by an incredible OG artist as well, who's a musical artist. So there's ways where the image and then the sonic and language spaces came together to help us really kind of build this almost an identity of what the project is in terms of exchange and wild imagination and like resistance, this like OG form of resistance to just call things out. So yeah,
Thanks,
that
Maura.
flows through for me.
Lumi, I'm wondering, so that we could hear maybe your voice in this.
Yeah.
Josh, can we go to the holding slide for the video? Maybe just as a way to introduce, what it was like to go to Hanoi, or even to some of the research that you did last summer. Would you like to speak to, yeah.
Well, yeah, sure. I mean, I think I just want to like jump off of what Maura was talking about in terms of the title and Ngakdai. I mean, I just missed that studio
Yes.
visit, unfortunately, and I arrived like the day after that studio visit or something, and I was getting all these, WhatsApp messages from Maura and Ang and Tung Lin, who was also on the visit, just being like, "This is crazy." But I think like a really important part of kind of choosing his lyric for the title of this exhibition is just that I think in this moment, right, of course, that we're experiencing right now in the United States, in terms of how it's very polarized. It's about being on one side and staying on one side. That there are these figures like Ngakdai, who was a soldier, a North Vietnamese soldier, became this like incredibly successful avant-garde composer, musician, recognized internationally, but like, kind of is only able to do this, and like many other other artists that are considered experimental or radical or whatever, because of certain alliances that they still have, right? Like certain relationships. And so it's this ambivalence that is spoken about in the title is this, this idea that like um, you're always being watched, but this the radical nature of your artwork is only allowed by that ambivalence of like the people in power not really caring in the the in predictable ways, let's say, like that um the conditions for being allowed to do something are always so ambiguous and constantly shifting, and like, and also the ways that ambiguity in the way that you present yourself, you present your work, also can allow you to do things. So it kind of goes in all these different directions, and I think is like a very I mean, I think at this particular moment everyone is asking us like, what lessons are we learning from the artist? What lessons are we learning from the artist? And I think that is like actually for me, like the number one lesson is that like it's never just like you're on the other side and you're always resisting, and it's never like, it would not be possible for anyone to make work in that under those conditions. And it's always a negotiation of, does this like, should this work be in the world, and like how are you going to let it exist in the world, and how are you going to make it exist in the world, you know? Yeah, and all these kind of transactional relationships that have to happen around that so that um, you can have an audience and build an audience and build a community.
Thank you so much. So I do want to show some thing of like the like shall we say the weather that this work exists within, and we're going to look at a short video excerpt. But I also want to point out that that the title of this entire program comes from song lyrics, how important sound and kind of like time-based and these kind of visceral, multimodal experiences are to this experience of Vietnamese experimental performance art. I don't know, Josh, before we start real quick, does anyone want to introduce this artist quickly or the piece, or should we just go play? We're going to play like maybe 2 minutes at the beginning and then a minute at the end.
We
Well,
should
Maura's
definitely say,
showing this.
yeah,
Yeah.
I was gonna say, well, we should definitely say that Tuan is one of the artists who's here right now, is probably rehearsing at this very moment or on their way to Performance Space New York to use some studio time. So one of the 4 artists that are here, and is a dance artist from Saigon. This film is their directorial debut. And one of the sort of origins or part of the influences that they're also from the same province as my family, which is central coastal. And, Vietnam is so much coastline. And so the way that climate change is having a huge impact on the fishing industry. And after there was like a major event in 2016, and just watching the decimation of some of the fishing industry, and just trying to also address how that was changing lifestyle, and also that this isn't like an ongoing issue, was something that had been in an early part of the conversation to what we will see is really a very fantastical work, but just that's also like a constant and pervasive ongoing concern for folks living in Vietnam and all around the globe, but the way that, of course, certain parts of the world are being hit very hard because of what's happening due to climate change.
Thanks, Maura. Lee, did you have something you wanted to also say before we show the clip, or we just show it? Okay, let's just run it, Josh. Great. Thank you, Josh. So maybe we'll go back to the slides. Wow. So to give you a sense of, again, this like multi-sensory experience that is about to unfold in New York City. We can go to the next slide, Josh. So I wanted to invite the organizers, curator, artists to actually also speak to us a little bit about the other additional 3 artists that have come to New York City from Vietnam, and maybe talk a little bit about each one of their practice, and why them in particular, why these 4, and what you're hoping that kind of opens up in terms of like our understanding and our, kind of like, what we're going to know now about Vietnamese experimental performance. I mean, I'm going to open it up to any one of you to speak to each of the artists.
I can start with like Zioha. I mean, she's honestly like when I had like a seed of this project like years ago, which just like, oh, I want to bring some of Vietnam to New York. Like it's really her. Like she for me is the person. Like she just so I like deeply identify with her on so many levels, and she makes really, really intense, hardcore, fierce, embodied feminist work, and is one of the very few women who do it. There are not many women in Vietnam making art at all, and she has been doing it for yeah, like 2+ decades now, and this is like her most iconic work in the sense that um, this is flying up. Part of the work, like it started very quietly with her like removing like her butt stuffing, and which are things that she wear on a daily basis and never tells anybody, even her husband. So her husband like finds out during that performance for the first time that this is a practice that she engages in. But what she got really famous for is like she then stripped naked, and it's like oh hell break loose, and cover herself in some kind of glue, and then like glue these bird feather onto her, and then go and grab a small bird in a cage, put it inside her mouth, and then um, you think that she's gonna eat it, but then she opens her mouth and the bird flies up. So that performance went super viral. It like all the journalists covered it. It even like there's a video of it on Pornhub, and it shut the space Nyasan down. And Nyasan, you saw a picture of Nyasan a little bit before. It's like the kind of experimental art hub. It's an artist house where people were just there eating, socializing all the time, and they make work, and there's installation space down the basement, and it's just like this ecology, architecture, very porous space. And because of this performance, it got shut down. But she her practice like exceeds that performance. She approaches her whole life as research for performance art. She really thinks of herself as this like vessel for research, for performance, for politics, and yeah. I don't know what she's gonna do in New York though.
I was going to ask actually, as you introduce the artist, if you could say anything about what we might see, but if it's like, where these, did you task them with like a commission, historic work? Yeah, no, it's like whatever they wanted to come here for. Well, that's exciting too.
I think she's doing some kind of tribute to group that she had called Cyper Lab, which is like this 3 year long project where it's all private performances. Like she did performances, I think every week, a few times a week, with this group of people who are all non-artists, and they like are somewhat like influenced by psychodrama therapy, so they like act out stuff. I don't know. This is all very vague. Like this is all just me hearing things from her. I can't quite imagine, but basically there are like some kind of situations that she put them in for 3 years, and she says they all hate her for it. And I think she's gonna do some tribute to that period because it was all so private and it was never publicized, and she wants to do something proper to yeah, for that group. That's all I know.
It's already sounding, amazing.
I'll just add that Ang and I are in the dressing room of Performance Space New York right now, which is why sometimes we get interrupted by the staff or the artists. But, a huge part of the project was just like the amazing kind of technical support, curatorial support, production support that a space like Performance Space New York offers, and how their openness and their just like willingness to improvise is such I mean, it is really a luxury for people in New York, but it's also so to bring these artists from Vietnam into this space and just allow them to do whatever. I think at a certain point we're gonna have to shape things, but right now they're really in a time of like play and experimentation with these kind of tools that they haven't yet, or that many of them have not really had access to previously.
Yeah, three of the artists have never worked in a theater before because theater is locked behind like communist propaganda machine. So if you don't make that kind of work, like you just simply don't have access to that apparatus. So they are really trying things for the first time, like what lighting. They're like, okay, like,
Right.
what?
Yeah.
Yeah, I love that, I guess, condition that you're talking about, that what does it mean to take something from the world and bring it into a theater, and in what way, and then a planned audience and production support. But I also love that Fong just posted a little heart for love for Performance Space New York, or love for doing international collaborative work. Why don't we take a look at another artist, Josh, for
Is
the
it
next? Oh,
possible just to jump 2 slides ahead, because that's also one of her work
sure.
while
Yeah, of
we're on
course.
her, just to
The next
one
one,
more.
maybe, yeah.
One more.
Oh my
Yeah,
God.
this.
Yeah.
Just because this is also Nyasan, but it's another one of her works where she's ironing. This is like pig skin, right? And she's like ironing the pig skin onto herself. So that like it's quite her work has like historically been quite extreme, but I just thought I saw that it had been, that was in our deck, so I was like, let's just also include that while we're on her before we jump. Yeah.
So we could either go back to but I do, I mean, I actually thank you for sort of referencing the artist space that you were speaking of, that where you had, where was probably image number 3 or something, that was like if there was any place that experimental artists gathered, or were hosted, or that there was even an audience that would come see the work, and sort of like how that was also part of your research. But we can organically go and talk about experimental art spaces, but also about the artists themselves, and then what coming to New York
Yeah, I'll just say
mean.
one thing about Nyasan before we jump, just because I know I have to sneak away. That Nyasan, where an act happened that got shut down, and was that slide from before, that was this incredible meeting place, and it was a really important part of the Mekong project. And Nguyen Man Duc, it was his Duke's Stilt House, was named, like the New York Times called him like the godfather or grandfather of Vietnamese experimental art, because so many artists were supported in that space. And just one kind of legacy thing is that then in this round with We Exist, and for the Movement Research Performance Journal, Duke, who had been operating the Stilt House, it's his daughter who's keeping the legacy going with the Nyasan Collective. And so she's contributed to the Movement Research Performance Journal. So there's just a little bit about how like the generations are like finding new ways to make sure things happen. Even if they've lost space, they become nomadic. They're still artists, and they're still finding ways to support each other, which is, something that we all want to remember has to happen regardless of what happens to art institutions and organizations.
Great, thank you.
And
That's super
but
helpful.
also I might be quietly slipping out within the next 5 minutes, so sorry for that.
That's okay. Thanks so much, Mara. What about Pulak? Or this artist?
Yeah, I can talk a little bit about them. So, Fuluk
Fuluk.
means the appendix. And so they are a collective from Hanoi. And so this is actually one of their first performances, which you can see is kind of at the same time as same year, same context as Lai Zuha's performance that we just showed. And so, but extremely different work, like kind of almost the polar opposite. And I mean, in our dreams, we had wanted to bring like the entire collective over, which is around four, sometimes it's 6 people, but it's about four people.
Four.
And that wasn't possible. So the artist who came over is Vu Duc Duan. And so, who's on the left of this image? So, is this his first time performing outside of the collective?
Oh, no.
No, he's okay.
He's done stuff outside the collective.
But, they're coming from, this kind of different, I would say, perspective where they were like, they were friends in art school. They were kind of influenced by seeing these kind of like earlier performances, and like when there was just like actually a lot of kind of like maybe not academic, but like a lot of conversation around performance in cultural spaces, kind of in this moment that like predated Maura's or time in Hanoi or in Vietnam, and they were criticized for being too theatrical in many ways. So it was kind of like, because they were taking performance art away from this kind of like endurance or kind of visceral body art and making it into something a bit more situational, or kind of creating like scores for them to kind of work within, like structures to work within or props to work with, and they often like all dress the same. So there was this kind of like identification of them as like performers in this other way, and they've become really 15, 16 years later, they become an incredibly important influence on performance art community in Vietnam. They have a huge retrospective up at the Nguyen Art Foundation in Saigon right now, which is really meaningful because of all these issues that we've talked about in terms of not only the relationship between documentation and any performance, but within the conditions of making work in Vietnam, where those resources are not necessarily always available, but also just ways in which you are more able to be scrutinized, right? Like the more you're documented, the more your work is able to be scrutinized. So something that's very special about their work is that they have, through this exhibition, they have this incredibly rich online archive built by the curator of the show, Van Do, who has also contributed to the journal that we edited, where she talks about her very kind of personal relationship to the work and how much it's influenced her as a curator. And so I think Ang is being roped into the performance that Tuan is doing here.
Part of the script.
Yes.
It's very theater in like their own way. And I think like the reason we went for Tuan over the other members of Footlook too is because Tuan has a very robust mentoring practice, curatorial practice. He's part of the Nha San Collective. He is part of the curatorial board of this important space called As Space in Hanoi. And he takes a lot of young people in his own weird way.
Yes.
A very sweet, sensitive, clowny guy.
And just like one anecdote that I felt like spoke a lot to us when we had like our first meeting about this, which was really just dinner and a lot of beer, but like they were telling us about this experience they had being invited to Documenta through Nha San, and the kind of like difficulties in like negotiating their performance for Documenta, and kind of like what is questioning like what are the benefits of being or being given this huge platform that is so prestigious if like you can't actually do what you want to do. If the bureaucracy, if the conditions are not actually going to support your work or the type of work you do. And so that was something that I think we really held to heart in inviting them, or one Todd over.
Thank you so much. So this is just another performance document of a different piece, but why don't we go to Neely, or if I'm pronouncing their name correctly, hopefully not. And Maura, do you have any like parting thoughts you want to offer before, yes, you have to go teach, or
Yeah,
need to
so
move on?
sorry. I have to go to what I call conclave. It's like the whole faculty, the chairs and deans. Just that I'm so excited that Nile is here. And these folks will talk about what she's been up to, but just a really exciting young artist who was part of, I think, when we were in our curatorial. So we were all like, when Ang says it's like vibes, it really is this incredible practice of us meeting. We met so many folks, did so many studio visits, or met and some folks who were like the big shots, and then also just like meeting Nile in a cafe and having seen some of her work, but then just kind of meeting her and talking about what her life is like as an artist and just her experience, and feeling so connected. So yeah, both like Lai Zuhua and Nile are like these spectrums of experience that I'm so excited that we were actually able to bring this kind of range of artists for this experience. So that's what I'll say, and then you all can talk about her work. But thank you for including me, and I'm sorry so much that I have to slide away to the Jedi Council.
We look forward to seeing you at the performances, Maura, and more other programs to come this month. Joshua, let's just go to the next slide for Nile, and then maybe invite Lumi. You're going to be in conversation with her, right?
Yeah. So as one of our many public programs, I will be in conversation with Nile and Liza, also with Catherine Damon, who incredible performance art historian and professor at NYU's Institute of Fine Arts, next Tuesday, February 3rd. And so I think, as Maura just kind of mentioned, for Nile, Liza to be at kind of these ends of the spectrum in terms of like, I mean, not ends of the spectrum generationally. They're really just one generation separate, or 1.5, or something like that. But, Liza being from Hanoi, Nile being from Saigon, and representing like very different perspectives, but also like very much a shared, I think, as Ang was saying in the beginning, just like this idea of like performance is something you need to do all the time. It's something that sustains you. It's something that gives you reason for living. And I think when we met her in this cafe, we like that set so strongly. And even in like reviewing her portfolio for this talk, I was like, oh my god, she's done like so much in just the past few years. But and the range of the work is goes from these like, let's say, a smaller gesture of wearing this t-shirt that's just actually just trying to like encourage like younger generations or people outside of the art world to like think about, if they hate performance art, what performance art is, like, kind of just promoting discussion in that way, to the image on the right where she is buried in the soil and people come and speak to her until she feels that it is the right time to emerge. She's someone who's, we felt like it was very, very important to not only kind of put in a theater setting to see like what happens when the work kind of like scales up, but also just like, I mean, for all the artists to just be in New York and see as much performance as possible and feel like they are part of something that's larger than, the four of them in a house right now, or like, just feel like they're really interconnected to a larger community of experimental makers.
Great. Thank you so much. I'm sort of picturing like, you know, the things that we're not going to be able to see actually in the theaters, like, taking them out to dinner or taking them to Times
Yes,
Square, taking them to
definitely.
Coney Island. I hope you have a camera with you the whole time and that you're
The weather
The
has really put a
weather.
damper on
well, yeah, I could
our,
see. Yeah, she could bury
Yes.
herself in the snow or something. It's like, their first
yeah.
introduction to snow. I mean, you imagine that. But so let's just see what else comes out of, they're coming to New York. Why don't we, before we go to Q&A by the audience, quickly, could you speak to actually your work as editors? So Josh, if we can go to like the slide of the movement research issue and how important it was to bring this, textual texture to the project. And again, there's quite a bit of poetry actually in this issue, but also to talk about literally the language, and sort of like what it means to live in this other space of like a tonal language and how, the work of publishing these texts by these other voices, literally the other voices, what it meant to the project. And again, huge congratulations in pulling together these, the different kind of like ecosystem that, our downtown dance and performance community exists within, a venue, the publishing platform, whatever, Visa's travel sponsors, all that. People were making dinner for you. But yeah, I mean, Lumi and Ang, if you want to speak a little bit about working with movement research, and obviously huge congratulations to Josh Lubin Levy, who was, one of the I feel like another kind of like father ghost here, in terms of like the support,
Definitely.
support from
Yeah.
Wesleyan and yeah, sort of like someone who understands, what it is to uh, work with these artists and try to do these experimental projects. But yeah, let's talk a little bit about the journal. And we have one more slide, which actually has the schedule of performances and programs. But then we obviously want to take questions from all of you. And then we have a very special closing. But yeah, the journal. I mean, what was it like to sort of pull this together and what kind of like you're thinking, how does it live alongside or with or after the performances in New York?
I will start by acknowledging that I feel like the reason we were able to do so much with this project, well, I mean, is because of Ang. And not only your kind of like, just like imagination, like, it was very much like, if this came from a curator, it'd be like, we can't do this. We can't do this. Like, we can only do one thing. But like, I think because it was like spearheaded by like artists and like your own like, I don't know, drive to bring all these people together, like that is why we were able to like work in all these different modalities and like actually pull it off. But I think the journal was always part of your plan.
Yeah. Because I helped Josh growth me into like an earlier issue 60, which was on gender disarray. Like we can whatever. I don't want to go into it, but then I was like, oh, Josh is experimenting with this like editorial structure of how to bring in outsider voice, and so it was like, what if we just take over a whole issue? So that was the proposition to Josh, and he was like, sure, why not? Let's do it. And we just worked like a dog for a year. Like, that was the narrative of how. No, but I think the journal, because like we knew that we can only bring like a very specific like 4 or 5 artists, and like we need a whole other context and other voices, and because like these people, they make work from a very different perspective, history, context. Like they don't have theaters. Like it's not like they're performing at venues, and they it's a whole different conversation. So I always know that we need some kind of tentacles to communicate some of that as best as we can. And the designers have been super, super helpful. I mean, you see a little bit with how they approach our bios and our names. Like, the reading experience is kind of assaultive in this way, where like there's all these different font sizes that attack and jump out at you to sort of embodies this oral, they call it oral interjections. Because Vietnamese is a very oral language. Like even in its textual form, it's always a very oral experience. So that was one of our guiding principles of how to stay close to the oral history of performance art in Vietnam, because there's no documentation. We didn't really see much documentation of the people that we talk with. It's just gossiping and beer and dinner and just a lot of hearsays and so I feel like we really want to bring that into the journal somehow, and the designers really did a good job of it.
Yeah,
Amazing.
I think I mean, there were so many, like the whole project, there were so many ways that we could have approached it. And I think there were a lot of times where I think because it's a publication, right? It's like a tangible thing that's in print. And then we brought in a lot of writing that spoke about historic events in the performance art scene. But we really wanted we wanted the information to come from the people who were there, and we really tried to avoid, like, there were all these questions around, like, okay, like how do readers enter this if they have no idea about the history of Vietnamese performance, like, this is their first engagement with any of these artists, which I think for most readers it will be. And but at a certain point, like, we as organizers kind of like released ourselves from the responsibility of being like, here's a timeline, here's an appendix of definitions, like here are the major events, and kind of like wanted the reader to experience it in the same way as like we would over dinner or drinks
Yeah.
or something like that. And like, they can enter a totally different timeline. I mean, I think that was like, over but sometimes we would have like these like 4-hour meetings, and I'd be like, okay, so then this happened before this, and then this person met this person. And so we do really, like, we kind of structure the journal slightly chronologically, but at the same time, we know that there's no like logic there, let's say.
Yeah.
Amazing. I mean, I can't wait for it to actually come out. And but we know that it's coming soon. Maybe just Joshua, we'll just scroll to the next to last slide, just to give everyone a sense of okay, well, so actually this is one of the authors, artists that's featured in the journal. We'll go to the next one. Just to let people know, there does exist some documentation of the programs that the editor, artists, choreographers have been doing in New York. So both Asia Art Archive and Kara have kind of sort of laid the groundwork in the fall for these performance programs coming to New York. Lumi mentioned and Lumi and Ang are sitting in the dressing room of Performance Space New York, where the performances begin on Thursday, and then Sunday there'll be like a whole afternoon lawn kind of like whatever like an open afternoon of performances. Tuesday is Lumi's talk with sorry,
Liza Had,
Liza Had, yeah. I think we would love to open it up for a few minutes to audience questions, and then we have
sorry,
go ahead,
Christina,
Lumi.
can I just break it down a little bit, because I know it
Sure.
can get confusing for people. So next Thursday at Performance Space is the launch of the journal, where
This Thursday.
yes, this Thursday. We'll have readings, and then we'll also have a screening of a documentary that's related to Eng's piece in the journal, and features Ngoc Dai, who is the musician that we took the title from. And I just wanted to clarify on the first, that is like a workshop, so people are participating in Yilei's
Important.
open movement. Yes, but it is open to everybody, at all skill levels and engagements with movement. And then we have the talk, but then the February 5th is really the most important date, which is like the premiere of all these performances by these 4 artists at Performance Space New York.
Great. Sorry, I left off the most important date.
No, it's okay. That's why we're here to
just fill the oral history here, the oral future. Chloe and Joshua, or would you want to open up to audience questions for a few minutes?
Yes, thank you so much for that conversation. Before I go into a few questions that we have from the audience, if you do have another question for our guests today, there's a link in the chat where you can submit your question online. Our first question today comes from the audience, and they write, this conversation has been so rich and vital. Thank you. Has this project changed the way each of you think about commemoration as a practice?
I'm too in it to think about commemorating. I think it's I don't know. It's good that we are on 2026 timeline. So I feel so released from that 50th um thing. I think like to in my opinion, to commemorate something is just to keep living. So I think it's so nice that we could just have that frame that we start with and then completely let go of it and just be like, okay, what do you need in the theater? Or even in our approach to the journal, it was just like, okay, this is the frame that we're starting, but hey, what do you want to write about? Like, we didn't task anybody really. I mean, there's some people that we did task with certain things, but most of it was just like, we just want your voice heard.
Right.
Like, that was the most important thing. And I think all three of us share that philosophy of like what is most important is just you. Like we want you.
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, the I think this idea of like responsibility and commemoration and like letting go and like kind of valuing all, the valuing the inability to like encapsulate any experience in like one
Hmm.
type of commemoration has been so important. And I think that like, I think when the anniversary actually happened and I was kind of like seeing like this, I was talking about how like we didn't get any grants that we applied for. And it was like really great because like, it had to be all about like, the opportunities that the freedom that American offers in
Yeah.
terms of cultural expression and blah blah all these things that of course are like completely untrue at this point. So I think it was like really understanding that like this is such a like taking this other perspective while there's this like we're experiencing our own propagandistic perspective on history right now is beyond important. Um, I mean, and especially like, yeah, I mean, I was just thinking about like how, like Trump didn't acknowledge the anniversary this year, and like that was a huge blow to the Vietnamese American community, and then like all the other kind of topics that were brought up around the 50th anniversary, I think were maybe like partially sponsored by the Vietnamese
Hmm.
government. So
Yeah.
that has
Yeah.
like a very, like just everything coming out of that commemoration was really stood in opposition to what we were
Yes.
trying to do.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for that response. Before we get to our last question, I have a really quick question for you both as well, about the term sort of curator artist, and how that is maybe held in relation to what you were discussing earlier about the encounter between the diaspora and then revisiting artists in Vietnam, and like bringing artists to the US, in a sort of curatorial capacity while also having your own artistic practice, and whether or not there's any tension in that relationship between those two things, or have you found it to be very generative for either a curatorial practice or your artistic practice or performance practice?
I
That's
mean,
a very loaded
you're deep in
question.
that. Yeah.
I feel like I don't identify with curator at all as a label, as a I mean, I believe in it as a practice actually, and I think I learned so much actually working with Lumi. I just felt like it was helpful being in Vietnam and realize how so many artists curate. Like Toàn, Vũ Đức Toàn curates a lot. There's this person, Chen Leung, also like one of these like OG performance artists, curates a lot. And it speaks to like a certain historical necessity um, of what it means to be an artist in Vietnam to me, that you just have to make things happen because things just like there's no infrastructure there really. So like if somebody has to make things happen, like it has to be you. So I think that spirit like that's just my compass. I'm not so guided by, oh, I want to be a curator. Oh, like with this next project, like I want to do this, do that. Like, I just see what needs to happen and then just do it. And then once they're here, I'm like, I want to cook for them. Like I just want to take care of them. I want to make sure that they feel supported, and which I think is what a good curator does. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure.
Um, I mean, fundamentally, I identify as an artist. Yeah.
Yeah, I never wanted to be an artist. I mean, as professionally, I'm always here to, position of support and encouragement and criticality, and anyone who knows my curatorial work, they know it's very, very artist-centric. I work primarily with like commissioning, and I work few objects and things like that. So it's really about like the relationships that I'm able to build as a curator.
Thank you both so much for that response. And our last question today comes from the audience, and they're curious about how the project has evolved over the course of its planning, seeing as there's so many moving parts at so many different organizations in New York.
I can't keep track. It's changed so much.
It's changed a
I
lot.
can't keep track.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think that it speaks so much to like the three of us as collaborators, the people that we're working with as collaborators in terms of the spaces, other.
I mean, like literally, like Taja from Performance
Yes.
Space, like has no idea what we bring in.
No idea.
I was so shocked that they
Yeah.
have such a high tolerance for the unknown. Like up until the very first production meeting, which was last week,
Right.
they had
And we've been talking for like almost
almost
2
2
years.
years.
Yeah.
And so yeah, like thanks to people like Josh and Taja, like Josh also doesn't know what the journal is gonna be, and just completely entrusted that frame and production apparatus to us and let us decide.
Yeah.
We never had to report to them at any points when things change, and we all just improvise together. So it's really difficult for us to talk about how much has changed because they change all the time.
Yeah.
Like Light Xiuhua didn't get her visa the
Right.
first
The visas
time.
are like a huge, because it's like if the artists didn't get
Yes.
their visas, then the whole project would change. And we were talking about like, would this even exist? Like, should we just call off the whole project if none of the
Yes.
artists can come?
But thankfully, her second try went through, and like it's just difficult working on a project like this, and you can't be attached to any versions of what you think it's gonna
Exactly.
be.
Yeah. Yeah.
Thank you so much for that response. And that concludes our audience Q&A. So with that, I am going to toss it back over to you both as I pull up the reading.
Oh, you have to do the
You want to
reading.
read the English, or should I
Oh,
just
are we
read
reading the English and just the Vietnamese?
both?
Yeah, I was thinking we would love to hear it in Vietnamese.
Okay.
People could
Okay, I'll read the
read along the
Vietnamese.
English. Yeah, yeah.
Okay. Cái gì siêu thực ở đằng trước mà buồn cười ở phía sau? Cái gì sang ngang thì kinh tởm mà xuống dưới thì hổ thẹn? Cái gì ở lại thì kiệt quệ mà nhảy lên thì dịu dàng? Cái gì mở mắt thì vĩ đại mà nắm lại thì tự do? Chẳng có gì cả, chẳng có gì cả. Chỉ biết phía đông là máu, phía tây là người, phía nam là đất, phía bắc là mẹ. Cứ thế mà đi. Yeah.
Thank you so much. Christina, was there anything you wanted to add here?
Well, no, just to confirm who the author is and
It's Nile, right?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, that's what I
She
thought.
wrote it.
Yes.
She wrote it. Yeah.
And it's kind of considered like a starting point or like a prompt for the open movement workshop that will be happening on Sunday at 4 p.m.
Amazing. Thank you so much. Thank you, Lumi, and Maura, who had to step out early, and Christina. Thank you, Christopher from Performance Space, for their support in preparing for today's event. We'd also like to thank the Marion Bolton Kippy Stroud Foundation and Tiger Foundation for sponsoring our NSE program and making these weekday conversations possible. and for their support of our growing archive, which you can view on the Rails YouTube channel. The Rail has been free and independent for 25 years. A donation directly supports our writers, production staff, and operations. Support our work through the link in the chat. And if you're available, join us tomorrow at 1 p.m. for a conversation with Alicia Quade and Ginevra de Blasio on the event of Infrasupra at Forough in Rome. And as is Rail tradition, we now invite you to say hello and goodbye as you leave today. Thanks so much for coming out.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you
So much.
Thank you.
For the conversation.
Thank you
Thanks
so
much,
much.
Lumi and Lang and
Thank you,
Christina.
City of
Thank you.
Asylum.
Oh my God.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.